Hello friends, it's been a while. I've had this awful croaky voice which I can't seem to shake off, so if I sound a bit ridiculous, please excuse me. This is Granny's GodPod number 78, Paperback Writer. I wonder how many of you remember the Beatles' song Paperback Writer. I can hear it in my head as I write. These days it is common for a hardback book to be published first, and if it is successful, then a paperback edition follows in a few months. This happened with Bart Ehrman's book Misquoting Jesus. The main theological argument of the book seems to be that Christian teaching concerning the inspiration of the Bible is rendered practically meaningless by the very existence of numerous variations in the ancient manuscripts. Michael Marlowe, the editor of the BibleResearcher.com site, has said Ehrman does not adequately describe or interact with the traditional Christian teachings on this subject. You may have heard of Ehrman's allegation that in an oral culture, repetition would be similar to the telephone game, which was a party game where a sentence was whispered from one to another around a group, and it would often be hilariously different by the time it got to the last person. Of course, an oral culture didn't whisper to one another, and there would be opportunities to correct misremembering by a more knowledgeable person. In an oral culture, it would be fair to say that memory was a much better trained muscle than ours is today. Misquoting Jesus is a book which may challenge Christians because it talks about textual variances or scribal errors between manuscripts, as though they are contradictions and should affect our trust in the scriptures. The number of variants that are both viable and meaningful enough to cause any serious difficulty is certainly not in the thousands, as Ehrman would have his readers think. Michael Marlowe says, I would say they amount to less than 100, and not one of them is half as interesting as many possibilities of interpretation that have nothing to do with verbal variations of the manuscript. In fact, no variant changes biblical doctrine. Nonetheless, we do need to know that the Bible is true. Jaden Forrest, a young Christian YouTuber, admits to finding a lot of difficult passages in the Bible and verses that can seem to be contradictory. But he says, according to his investigations, 99% are a result of not understanding the context, and he believes there are intellectually viable options to deal with the remaining 1%. Timothy Paul Jones has written a book in response to Misquoting Jesus, titled Misquoting Truth. Craig Evans has also responded with a book titled Fabricating Jesus: How Modern Scholars Distort the Gospels, in which he critiques several scholars, not Ehrman alone. As for Ehrman's Misquoting Jesus, Dr. Daniel Wallace, a leading New Testament manuscript scholar, draws attention to an important addition to Ehrman's paperback edition, that of an appendix. On page 252, Ehrman is asked, and I quote, "Why do you believe these core tenets of Christian orthodoxy to be in jeopardy based on the scribal errors you discovered in the biblical manuscripts?" The framing of the question, why do you believe, rather than do you believe, shows how most readers interpret this book, which is that we should question our faith because of these textual variants or alleged contradictions. Ehrman's response in print is: essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. This is quite an incredible statement, as it seems to rebut the position authored in the book. It leads to the question, should we take any of Ehrman's other claims with a pinch of salt? Michael Bird et al. Have written a book called How God Became Jesus, in response to Ehrman's book How Jesus Became God. There is also an extensive critique of Ehrman's interpretation of Mark's Gospel by Mike Winger in number 65 of his YouTube series on the Gospel of Mark, titled How an Atheist Scholar Misleads Millions of People. Unfortunately, I think it is unlikely that those who have been swayed by Ehrman's writing are going to take an unbiased view of any contradiction to his arguments. For instance, speaking from experience, I've been told I can't use the Bible to prove the Bible. What other ancient text would be so ridiculously hidebound and judged in this way? For example, there is historical evidence outside the Bible for Jesus, but there is no evidence Homer existed outside the Iliad and Odyssey. Apart from that, the Bible is a series of individual books, so there's no reason why one author cannot explain or support another. Sometimes, when I offer an explanation of a biblical misunderstanding, the explanation is dismissed because the scholar I've referred to is a believer, as if only a correction from a secular scholar will do. Yet this bias is unrecognised. Who in the secular world cares if wrong ideas are circulated about the Bible? Even if they did, potential sales are a consideration. Ehrman is a professor of religious studies, and it is said that he has sold more than 2 million copies, with books translated into 27 languages, which includes 3 college textbooks. There is no doubt Ehrman is an influential paperback writer, in part because he gives justification to the many who simply do not want to believe. My university professor told us to be careful when we print off our work on the computer, because it so easily appears more authoritative once it is printed. As Christians, we should not accept challenges to belief or to the Bible just because we see it in print. Good questions to ask, amongst others, are who is the writer and how do they benefit? In fact, all readers should be able to critically assess what is put in print, whether it be journalists in newspapers and magazines or a paperback writer. If something is true, it will stand up to investigation. Well, that's all for now, folks. It's about all my voice can manage, I think, at the moment. If you have any particular difficulties explaining anything to non-believers, please put it in the comments. I'd be interested to know. Bye for now.